Hey, it's been a stressful 5 minutes. Um, welcome. We're gonna start in just a couple minutes, in like 5 or 6 minutes. And yeah, I just have like a couple things that I need to do to get set up. But feel free to jump into the chat. Oh, that's me talking. I can hear myself talking, and you can see my terrible screen full of my desktop full of stuff that shouldn't be there. Okay, cool. So now I'm in the right place. Welcome. I am going to post a link into chat here. Let's see. This is what I'll be working on. Code sandbox. Cool. Stream looks good. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me or seeing me, and we'll get that sorted out for you. Cool. Is there anything else I'm forgetting? I have my notifications off, streaming, turned off all my syncing and whatnot. I think I'm good. How is everyone doing today? Any exciting stuff? Happy to be here. Got meetings today. I'm double hydro flasking today. Got my little 10 ounce. Got my big one right here. Amazing. Can make this like a ASMR channel right now. Not hot at all. Pop out my chat. Three minutes. Hey, Kyle. Welcome. What are you discussing in those meetings today? Anything important, or just meeting stuff? Meetings on meetings. Anything fun, rather? I've decided that I really need to get like another screen that I can put up over here, so I can see this stuff without looking down, and then showing you just see the top of my head while I'm reading this stuff. This is not a good look. 2 minutes. This one's gonna be a nuts one. I'm typically a little bit more in the for me, I like to do one thing and just dive in, just really get into the nitty gritty of it. So covering a bunch of things, it's like my head is just a little bit full right now, a little constipated. So I'm gonna be happy when we get like through to the halfway point and we're like almost there. 1 minute. 1 minute. This is also the first time that I've actually gone through this approach of kind of teaching some of this stuff. And I've kind of gone through the material, adjusted it a little bit, and it's still. We'll see how it goes. It'll be interesting. Nothing fun today. I'm sorry. Sorry. Maybe I'll have some fun meetings on Friday. What is it that you what is it that you do, Kyle? Getting close. Doot, doot, doot. Hi, go cool. Yeah, this will totally be suitable for you. You'll see all of the code. It might feel a little bit fast, but I think that I think that I'm not covering anything like super advanced. There are going to be some things that might feel a little bit quick. There's some JavaScript stuff. I don't talk really about any of the JavaScript syntax that I'm using, so there might be some things there. But check it out. If it's not quite suited for you, there's another video that I have. If you look on my channel, there's two other live streams that I did, and there's one on function components. That's much more kind of like entry level React type stuff. So that might be a good fit. But yeah, I'm hoping to keep it like pretty simple today. I'm not going to be jumping like really deep down into kind of intense stuff. So hopefully it'll be a good fit. Awesome. Thanks everyone. Cool, cool, cool. Lots of JavaScript in React. Excellent. Hey, hey, hey! Welcome. It is 10:01. I got super excited about answering y'all's questions. So it is time to start today, and let me just give you a rundown of what I hope to accomplish today. My goal today is that we can talk about hooks from a very practical level. So I want to tell you about the hooks that I use all the time and how I use them. And we're going to do that by just kind of building up a couple examples. First, I'm going to build a really kind of run-of-the-mill, very bare bones to-do list. But we're going to build it up from scratch using a lot of these hooks so you can see how they work. Second, oops, wrong key. Second, I have this cart module that is pre-filled with like basically like a working shopping cart type of component. Now it's not amazing. It just kind of does a job. But this code uses a lot of patterns that we both talked about last week, and patterns that you'll likely see inside of a real application. So while it's not like production ready, a lot of these patterns that are in here I use every day right now in React, and I want to show you how I would go about kind of refactoring them to use hooks, because sometimes it's not totally straightforward and you might feel a little bit stuck taking an older component and transitioning it to hooks. So I just want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time today, or maybe a lot of time, going through the process of certain refactorings from kind of a class to hooks. So that'll be good. Hey, Byron, welcome back. So that will be kind of the roadmap for today. And we're going to move kind of fast. I was alluding to this earlier, but my typical approach is to take one thing and really dive in deep. And this is because we're covering hooks. There's a bunch of hooks, and so there's a lot of things to cover. So my mind is a little bit frazzled, so I apologize for that. But hopefully we can really make it worth your while. So big disclaimer right up front. I'm going to show you the easiest way to do all of these things. And so you might see a bunch of things in there like inline click handlers and kind of different patterns for things that you feel like, oh, like, is that really like the best way to do it? I am going for the most direct way. And that is just in service of keeping these examples as simple as possible, because they can get kind of hairy. So everything is going to be the most direct path, the most direct code. And then kind of if you have additional style or like performance requirements on your components, you can go from there. But this is not going to be an example of best practice, just kind of like code that works. So disclaimer number one. So with that, let's just dive in. Before we start, I want to make sure that you know how to find hooks documentation on your own after this. So it's just reactjs.org/hooks. Pretty simple. That's going to bring you to this introducing hooks page. But from here is a jumping off point to everything. So you should read these really like top to bottom, before doing hooks, because there's a lot of information that you're going to need to know in here. Let's see. And then the hooks API reference is where you'll go after that point, once you've kind of read all the to do about what they want you to know. And then this will take you to the reference for hooks. Now, they divide it up into two categories of hooks. First is basic hooks, which are going to be useState, useEffect, and useContext. These are really the money makers. You're going to be using these all the time. The only additional one that we're going to cover today is useReducer. Now, I see useReducer as important because whether you're coming from a Redux background, or you have, like myself, have been using set state on class components. useReducer is really the API that replaces those for you. So useState is great, but it's extremely limited, and useReducer is really going to be the replacement for a lot of like actual applications. So that's something to know. I actually saw a tweet by David Khorshid, and he was saying that useState is actually implemented under the hood using useReducer, which is really interesting. So this is, it's best to think of this as like the really simplest case. You have simple data like a number or a, what is it? I don't know, a string, or like simple types like that. But as soon as you get up into advanced types like objects and arrays, you should probably consider using useReducer. So here we go. Awesome. Welcome back, Liz. I hope this is great for you. Thank you for coming back. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with a little to-do list today. I know to-do lists are super boring, but they really do give you an opportunity to, they do showcase a lot of the things that you'll need to know really well, really quickly. So let's dive in. First things first, I'm going to create a new component to get this error off the screen. And we're going to return an unordered list that, let's see, we'll keep some, we'll do like to-dos. We're going to map over them. For each of those, we'll give a list item. We're going to keep this really simple. So these aren't going to be advanced to-dos. These are going to be like, just each one of them is going to be a string. So typically in app, they'd probably be objects, but we're just moving quick and dirty here. So for each, oh, I didn't do that right. We're going to take a to-do for each, return a list item. Cool. So the first thing is we can just like create an array here, to-dos, buy coffee. Regular, gotta close my unordered list. Boom. Okay. So we have like a really simple kind of component that has a static list that's just a variable, and we're rendering over that. Oh, yes. Emiliano, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to do my best to move this up. I haven't actually figured out in OBS how to set up keystrokes so I can actually take my face off sometimes, which would be nice. So yes, please, I'm going to try to keep an eye on the comments. So if I am blocking the code at any point, please let me know and I will address that. So yeah, so we got that. Now useState kind of makes this, it really makes this like super easy. we can just wrap this in state. So we'll say react.useState. We're going to wrap our list there. And now useState returns an array, okay? And the array is going to have two items in it. In the first position is going to be the state. So as soon as we wrapped this in an array and we said, hey, we want this first value, now this is all hooked up correctly. We can use that. Now, we could do this differently if we wanted to, like we did to do state, and you'll see this a little bit later. And then we could grab the first position of this. There's nothing magical really about the destructuring assignment that you commonly see. It's just the easiest way to name those variables instead of kind of having to access them through the array. So I think it's a very thoughtful API, and but there's really nothing magical to the destructuring that happens there. So to-dos is the first argument, or the first item in that array. And we can actually just stick with that right now. So we're using useState. We're giving it some default values here, and we're just taking that value, whatever the current state is. We're destructuring it off of the returned array, and we're using that to kind of map over our list. Now, this is not particularly interesting yet because we're not doing anything to update the list, right? So let's do so we got that. Now let's start by adding the functionality to delete them. I know that's number 4, but it's actually an easier function to write. So let's start with that. I'm going to add a button here. Type button, and this will be let's just use like a trash can. Okay, we'll close our button. Okay, so now we have this trash can. It doesn't do anything, but we have a button that we can use. Now, what we'll use that to do is we're going to, on click, we want to delete that item from the list. So we have our to-dos. So how would we do that? Well, first we need to pass in a function to onClick. And then onClick is going to call some type of state updating function. In this case, we'll call it update to-dos. Now, where is this function? We can get that as the second argument from useState. Update to-dos. Okay. So as I said, this useState is going to return an array. The first element of that array is going to be the state, and the second element is going to be a function that allows you to update the state. So if we want to go real simple, we say, hey, we want to update the to-dos to be an empty array. Now, what this is going to do is actually going to delete all of the items in that array. So no matter which one I click, it's going to delete both because we're just jamming in an entirely new array. It doesn't have any items in it whatsoever. So we can do better, obviously. So we are going to construct a new array from the old state and make the changes that we want to make. Now this is just going to be some JavaScript here, but we're going to. So we're already passing an array. What we want to do is we want to take the to-dos. We want to slice off the first set before the item that we want to delete. So this is going to be, let's see. Okay, so first, we need to change our map just a little bit so that we also take the index of the item so that we can have that so we know which one we're on. So I'm going to say update items. We're going to slice off the first part of the list to our index. So if we delete this one, it's going to be 0 to 0, or 0 to 1, so it's going to delete that one. If we do this one, it's going to be 1 to. I am not very great at describing this little bit of code, but you will see it anywhere that's like dealing with lists, and kind of in an immutable way like this. So we're going to take the portion of our list before the index that we want to delete. And then we're going to spread out the to-dos for everything after that index. So all the way to the end, to-dos.length. You know, I had turned off these little like hint things, and now they're showing again. So I'm not really sure why that is. Hopefully it fixes itself. Okay, so we're going to send in a new array. It's going to have all of the items from the previous array, with the exception of the one that we're on in this iteration. So we're going to test that out. Oh, didn't work. Why is that? Okay, so it worked for the second one. All right, so index to I plus 1 to-dos.length. If you see my error, let me know. I am not above reproach, obviously. Let's add some new items in here. Let's see why this is. Okay, so if I hit the first one, nothing happens. If I hit that second one, that one goes away. Third one, so all these seem to work. So we're going to pass in, so update to-dos, create a new array. That's a bad practice, don't do that. This is totally fascinating to me why this isn't working. Okay, I'm going to move on. But when one of you eventually sees why, like what stupid thing I did that makes this not work, let me know. So yeah, that is weird. Okay, cool. So let's we see that it's working for these three. I'm not sure why it's not working for the first one. So we will move on. So let's move on to updating. We want to use useState to update this item as well. Now we're going to do something pretty simple here. So we're going to I plus 1. Yeah, so I'm moving to I plus I. Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you, Byron. Much appreciated. I plus I. Stupid. Thank you. Okay, cool. It's always super stressful. Yeah, so we're going 0 to 1, and then we're skipping over the current one, and then, you know, the next one to the end of the array, we want to make a new array from all those items. So just removing the one that we have. Okay, cool. So we have that function is working. Let's go on a little bit further. So let's make this an input so that we can actually change this. The value of which will be the to-do there. Type text. And every time, now if I try to make some edits to this right now, nothing's going to happen. And that's because this value is set. No matter what, it's set. So what we need to do is we need to update that value. We need to kind of take advantage of the hook. We need to say, hey, update this to do, and then all these to dos are going to be updated, and then it's going to re-render this with the new stuff. We got to do this little song and dance here. So on change for this input, on change, what are we going to do? We're going to give it a function. That function is going to take the element as an argument that was or the event that happened. And what are we going to do with that? We're going to do another update function just like this. I'll move my code up. Now this time we want to do something pretty similar. So actually, why don't I copy and paste this so you don't have to watch me poorly write that JavaScript again. And okay, so now what this is going to do, since I copied that same function in, is nothing until I is going to delete the item that I am on when I try to change this. Okay, that is not what we want. So let's make a little bit of a change. So what we need to do is in the place where our current item is, okay, so we copy on everything before, everything after, and then for the place that our item is, we want to replace that with the target value, which we get off of the event that we receive when we use onChange. Okay, so now as I hit delete, that's going to change that one. I can go through these, delete that. Okay, and then I'm like, okay, I'm actually done with this one. Deleted, deleted, deleted. Okay, cool. So we have like a pretty functional but boring little to-do list. Cool, cool, cool. So those are the two two places that we would use this this use state. Okay, so we have edited the to-do list. Let's show the. Let's do this. Let's show how many to-dos we have in the document title. Now, for this, we're going to use an effect. And what useEffect does is it allows us to kind of call a function every time we render that has some effect outside of the component. So we can sync up data with the outside world. Now, this is really handy in cases where we want to use some type of imperative DOM APIs, like changing the title. So let's do this here. Now, one thing that's important is that because we're using use state to create that state as to-dos, what we need to do is we need to put our useEffect afterwards here. So react.useEffect. And for useEffect, as the first argument, we're going to give it a function, okay? And in that function, we're going to do whatever imperative work that we want to do. So the document title, we're going to set that to some, let's see, to-dos left. And we'll use our to-dos, and we'll grab the length from that. Okay, so you see up here, now the title has 4 to-dos, and that's pretty cool. So changing this doesn't change that title, but as soon as I delete one, we have 3, 2, 1, and 0. Very, very cool. So you can see useEffect is really can be used like very easily to provide this type of functionality where you need to sync something up with the outside world. In this case, it's pretty simple, but you can also use that for fetching data, all kinds of goodies. So let's see, what should we do next? Now I want to show you something that can be a little bit confusing about useEffect. So useEffect has a second argument. So I said the first argument has to be this function where we're going to do whatever type of imperative work we want to do. The second argument is optional. Okay, so you've seen the behavior here when we pass nothing in as the second. It's going to update every time this component updates. So when the state changes, it's going to update, and you saw that in effect. Now, if we provide an array, okay, so it takes an array, it takes nothing or an array, but if we provide an array, this is only going to run the first time. So we see that here where we start with the number 4. But then if I delete something, it doesn't update. And that's because this is a way of restricting how many times this effect runs by certain inputs. And when we pass in an empty array, it's saying like, hey, don't observe any inputs. I only want this to run 1 time. But we can provide inputs. So if we say, hey, because we depend on to-dos, only update when we have new to-dos when to-dos changes. I don't care about anything else in the world except to-dos. So we can optimize this to only run when to-dos change. So now that I've added that back into our inputs, it's going to observe that. And when I delete this, 3, 2, 1, 0. Cool. So that is useEffect. Now, you may have been looking at this and gotten a little bit dismayed at the way that I have constructed this code. So we have our state here. We have our to-dos and our updater function. And then we're calling this directly, and all of this implementation for how those to-dos get updated is inside of these functions in this component. 1025, doing good. So we have all this data inside of this component, and this is not like a really great way. It'd be nice to kind of have that co-located with the state and saying like, hey, these are the operations that you can perform on state, and just call these functions, and you can do any of these things. So this is where useReducer comes in. And I want to kind of jump real quick to the documentation, because if you're not familiar with reducers, which actually I'm in that club with you, I kind of suck at writing reducers because I've been using useState for all of my stuff. I do a lot of UI development, not a lot of application development, and set state has been just perfect for everything that I need. If you've been doing a lot of Redux, you already know how useReducer works. So it looks very similar to useState. It's going to return an array, and that array is going to have the current state, which you can use, and then a single function called dispatch. Now, dispatch is a single function, and you will send it an action object. We'll talk about that in a second. That's the big difference between it and set useState, is that useState, it expects you to basically write a function that is going to fully replace the state of that thing. Here we have a little bit more fine-grained control. So we'll talk about that. You're going to pass in a reducer function, which is how you handle these state and action changes, and an initial state, just like we have over here, where we're passing this in as initial state. So let's try this out. Okay, so this refactoring is a little bit odd, but we'll get there. So bear with me. So because we have this remove, and it doesn't have it doesn't, let's see, care about the current target value. Let's start with that one. Hey, first, I'd like to just make sure that we can change this and read state first. So let's delete that. Our app still runs because we're not calling these functions yet. It will break as soon as I try to call those. And then I'm going to change this to useReducer. Okay. Now the signature is different for this one, so we need to provide a reducer function. Now I'm not super worried about that yet, so I'm just going to give it an anonymous function to get it working again. Now the signature for this, so first of all, we have it all working because we're pulling off these to-dos. We can map through those. It's still updating our title. So all of these kind of non-re-render parts of our application work just fine, which is great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get this function called dispatch. Okay. Yep. Dispatch. Okay. Now something that I kind of like to do just as an intermediate, so I can kind of understand the code, is I will just define this update to-dos function. So I'm going to call update to-dos, and we're going to define this in terms of what it would look like as a dispatch. So both of these actions will call update to-dos. Now that function doesn't exist anymore, we're going to create it and wrap dispatch with it, the dispatch that we get from our useReducer. So we're going to, actually don't need to return, we're just going to call dispatch. Okay, so every time this gets called, we're going to call dispatch. Now, the way these actions are constructed is that we send them off as an object, and we're going to apply a type to them. So in this case, we're going to call this remove item. Okay, and because we need an index, we're going to take that as well. We're going to put that on our object. Okay, so now this is going to need to get passed in. So we'll take index as an argument. And now we can actually copy this or cut it. Sorry. I cut too aggressively is what I did. So we want to delete just this. Oh. Vim, don't fail me now. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to pass in just the index, which is inside of this map is going to be I. So we're going to call update to-dos just with the index. That's the only thing that we care about. And actually, yeah. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put that function, that logic, I'm going to copy it out right now. We're going to put that logic inside of our reducer. Okay. So the reducer signature is that it takes the state, the current state of things, and then it takes an action, some type of function, these things that we've been doing already, and it's going to apply that to the state. So open that up. And commonly for this, we'll use a switch. Now, this is a syntax that I have to look up almost every single time because it just has never settled for me, but I think I might be able to do it. So action.type is what we're going to switch on. Now, this is not a magic value. This action is the object that we got, that we're passing in via dispatch. And the type we're setting to remove item. Okay, so we will open up a block for a switch, and we'll say when we, for the case remove item, what are we going to do? We're going to return a new array, and that array is going to have everything from the previous state. And then we're going to do some other stuff to it. Actually, because we're removing, we don't care at all about the previous state. Okay, so this array is just going to be returned here. So we just copied and pasted our function from before. Now we have to change this a little bit because this is now going to be, this is the action.index. And these come from state. Okay, so they're on this state argument that gets passed into useReducer. So, okay, and then let's change this to remove to do. Okay, now I want to go through that. I want to go through that a little bit. When someone clicks this little button, is going to call it, we're providing it a function that calls another function called remove to do and gives it the index of the to do that we want to remove. Okay. We've written that function just, kind of as an intermediate state, remove to do. It takes an index and it constructs an action, which we then dispatch to the function that we got from useReducer. I know it's like super confusing. There's a lot of moving parts in this. So we use this dispatch function and we throw it in action. Now, every time that function gets called, it has this signature. So it's going to use the existing, the current state. it's going to take this action object that we constructed and sent in, and it's going to kind of run that through this switch case statement where it says, hey, what's the action type? In this case, it's remove item. Okay, no problem. When we remove an item, we want to kind of take all of the previous items up to the index that we care about, and then take all of the items after that and squish them onto a new array. So hopefully this all still works. It does. Brilliant. Now, this intermediate function is really not necessary. I only did that because, to kind of illustrate this point here. So what I want to do is I want to take that out, and I can use this directly now. Man, my Vim foo is failing me today. Okay, and then index, we got to change this. We got to map the index to the I that we have. No problem. Okay, let's make sure that still works. Yep, no problem. Okay, so now what we can do is we can do a similar thing for here. To update, we're going to just use index directly again. So let's try that out. Or we're going to use dispatch directly again. So we'll call dispatch and say, hey, we have a new action type that we want to perform. This will be type update item. Missing the S. Oh, I think maybe that was from before. So let's see, update item. We will again need to pass in the index, which in this scope is I. And then we also want to pass in the new text. So that will be e.target.value. And let's make a case for that. Case update item is going to return. And let's change this, which we copied out. So we're going to delete that. Close up our array. And then just change things based on the action. So let's see. So to-dos is actually the current state. Okay. This is, we don't have the event. We only have action.text. State length. And the action index. Okay, so again, we now every time we have a keyboard change event, we're going to call dispatch and say, hey, the type of action we want to perform is update item. We want to do it to this index, and the text we'd like to replace it with is this. Okay, we have that case, and we've just kind of copied and pasted and adjusted what we had before. And it works like a charm. Still delete, and that is good. So that's pretty awesome. We have now covered, what is it? We covered useState, we covered useEffect, and we have changed useState to useReducer to be able to co-locate some of these actions with the state itself. So very cool, very interesting. What I would like to do next, if you have any questions, feel free to queue them up. I want to talk about the other big thing, which is context. So we've done that. Great. Boom. Context is the other very critical piece of this whole puzzle. And what it can be used for is to provide a context where things don't have to pass props around. Basically, anything under a certain part of the tree can just kind of like pull pieces of data out of the air. And I'll show you how to use that. Something that would be nice is if we had a total count on the list. Now we have it up in the document title, but it'd be nice if we also had it on this list. So let's go about doing that. Whoops. I'm going to add a strong tag here at the bottom. To-dos left. Now, because we have access to this directly on state with to-dos, we can access it the same way that we did in the rest of this render. So to-dos.length. Great. But that's not really a great illustration of context, so let's try to do it with context. When using context, we're going to create a new context. And we use the react.createContext API for that. When we do that, we need to assign it to some type of constant. So this will be to-dos context. Okay. Now we have this context object, and it includes a provider, which is how we kind of provide context to a certain part of the subtree, and then also a consumer, a way to read context from the context provider. I'm going to show you how that works. We can wrap this whole thing in a context provider, and the only thing that we need to provide that context provider with is the value that we care about. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my whole, actually I can't do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put to-dos on this context. I screwed up the first one. It needs to be a dot. Now here we're using JSX property access syntax. So when we create this to-dos, it has two components inside of it. And so I am accessing those here. So we're saying this is an object, and inside of it is a component called provider, and that's what we want to use. Okay, now that didn't change anything. I mean, it's providing context to this whole component, but we don't have any components that are consuming context right now. So let's do that. I'm going to delete this, and I'm gonna put that in a function. Let's move this up. Called to-dos total. Okay, now if I use this, total. Okay. It's going to complain because there's no to-dos defined, and rightfully so, because we've pulled this out of the scope where to-dos is defined. Fortunately, what we've done is we've taken our to-dos and we've put them on context. So we can use the useContext hook to say, hey, I'm actually in an environment, in a scope, where this is being provided to my subtree. So I just want to reach out, I want to grab that value from context. Let to-dos equal react.useContext. And what we do is we give it the full to-dos context. So you know that this has two, it's an object with two components inside of it. You don't give it, you don't break it down like we have in this one. We're actually just going to give it the full context object. Okay. And we have now solved that problem. So this component, it required us to-dos to be able to determine how long or how many items are left. And then it's going to grab that from context. And it's going to use the to-dos context. Now what that means is that somewhere in the tree that it gets rendered in, we need to use a to-dos context provider to define this, to say like, hey, this value for the to-dos context, anything that's going to use the to-dos context, is expecting this value. And that's the value that we're going to provide to this subtree. Now, as soon as I delete this, if I were to delete this provider here, oops, I'm gonna have to leave a fragment. We're gonna have a problem again because it is looking for length on to-dos, which is not defined in context. So that is context. All right, I think we covered all of the things that I wanted to cover in their very basic usage. So, and because there's no questions queued up, I'm going to kind of continue on and talk about some of these as refactorings. Feel free to ask any questions that you have as we continue on. So I'm going to change things up a little bit and go to a component that I already have in the oven. Now, I have long believed, I think it was it 2014, I taught my first class on React. And I had asked them to provide me a component that they had been having trouble with. What is something that they were having a hard time building that they wanted to learn how to build in React? So what's the point of slicing again? Okay, cool. Nigel. Sorry, I'm going to come back to that story in a second. Nigel asked, what's the point of slicing? So the thing with slicing is we're saying we have an array and we want the first set of values and we want a values up to this point and values after this point. And then we're going to make a new array out of them. We're basically taking our array, cutting it in half at whatever our current item is, and we're pulling those things apart, setting them aside. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to do some surgery on this item in the middle here, or delete it entirely, and then I'm going to bring those two pieces back together, make a new array, and then return that. Slice is really just a way of chopping up an array at any given point. Yes, Chris, as soon as we're done with the live stream, the video will be available as a YouTube archive. I think at the same URL, actually. So as soon as I hit stop, it's going to process, and then you'll be able to view anything that you missed. Okay, cool. So I was teaching this class. I needed a component, and they were like, we've been struggling with building a cart in, I think, Angular. So how would we build this type of UI in React? And the interesting thing is that we need to keep state at a certain point so that it can be used for totals of items in the cart, totals for the numbers in the cart, and that is kind of like a challenging thing if you don't know how to kind of do what we've just done with our items to like hoist state in certain ways and manipulate it instead of just trying to like manipulate it directly for each item. And I have kind of long believed that if you could build a cart, you really understand everything that you need to know to be like successful in React in constructing user interface elements and knowing where state should go and all that. So I thought today what we would do is I would use the component that or kind of a version of the component that I'd built for them, and we would kind of take it from the patterns that we've used in the past, so render props and in context, the old API, and move it into hooks and see how that works. So we're gonna do that. Now cart is in here if you're following along, and there's a bunch of things happening here. Now we've already seen, oops. That is so not what I wanted to do. Okay. So a lot of this is very similar to what we had before. We're going to be like managing this number state in the same way that we were before. And we can delete items in the same way that we did. Everything that we just did, almost identical to the way that we did it. There's a little bit of additional behavior, and that this is a link, and as you've seen now, it will take you out to that item. As I hit these, it's going to recalculate the total. I do a little bit of a check, so I do kind of like a fake check to see, like as if I was checking to see if there was more stock of those items. So if I hit go above 3, it's going to say, hey, we don't have any more of these to sell you. Okay. And then it keeps that 3 in state. If I go down to 0, it says, hey, you can't have 0 of these items in your cart, like remove it instead. And then it retains that 1. So these are all things that this component does. Let's look at the code real quick, though. It really isn't going to, diving into each portion of it is going to be the important part. So first of all, I always like to kind of check out the primary render method. Sorry, I'm moving around so much. We have a class component, and that class component has an updater function, which we use to use to update our state. So yes. So this is very similar to what we have had in our much more simplified example. We have this function that we can call from anywhere that's going to kind of like take the previous state, and then it's going to do these checks that I talked about. So it'll say like, hey, if there's 0, use this, 0 error handler. If, let's fetch the available stock. And if it's, if we are trying to go higher than the available stock, handle that with an error. Otherwise, do what we did in the other example, where we're going to take the items on our state. We're going to create a new object with the first half, update the item that we care about, and then slap on the second half. All very similar to what we had before. We have a function that runs right as the component mounts. So on the first render, that's when we fetch our items from the cart. So if I were to delete this, those items wouldn't be present. Those are being fetched asynchronously. And I'm actually faking that. So this is the function that does that. It's just returning a promise that after a certain period of time, we'll return those items. So I can make that longer. Say I could do that like 5 seconds. Man, is 5 seconds really that long? Insane. But we're just going to keep it at 0 so the thing renders pretty quickly. And then it's just kind of returning the items that might be fetched from a cart. Okay, these are really just functions that kind of, these are the handle 0 cart items, etc. There's a currency formatting function, all that kind of stuff. Those are the functions there. I have a context for this cart, which we will see used in a bunch of places. This is this total here. Let's see. Yeah, the total here is in a component that is using context, but using the class style of context. So use context type equals context, and then we use this.context.items. So you might see this in an application that is built on, was it React 16.3, because we had access to context, but no context hook. So a lot of these class components are using context this way. We also have contexts that are the item count right here is using a render prop, which we learned about in last week's video, to pull these items out of the context object. Now we can make this better too with some of the hooks. So these are all the areas that we're going to kind of explore hooks and in this kind of existing code base with some of the older styles. What's one more thing I wanted to show you? Oh yes, in our render method, we have a kind of it's like a render prop effect, I guess is the best way to think of it. But it is something that gets inserted inside of the or I guess like just a component effect. This is a component that doesn't actually render anything out to the DOM. All it does is it takes a title, and then it's gonna render the document title. So same functionality as the first to-do list that we built, but it's using a different component API, update document title. It anytime the component updates, it's going to update the document title with the props. So that's going to be like a good case for useEffect. In fact, why don't we just, let me see. So we did the tour of the code. I'd like to, yes, start with our document title. So here we have a render prop or a render, we have a component that takes a title and it doesn't actually render anything into the document. It actually just renders to this document title. If we go to that, we can see how it is implemented. Anytime this component updates, we do the document title and we change it to this. So every time I update an item, it's going to change the total, in which case it will change the title in the total. Now, this is great. This works fine, but we'd really like to use our sweet new useEffect hook. Unfortunately, we can't use hooks in class-based components, so we're going to have to change this. Okay, 10:55. I knew I was starting to feel tired, and it's right around that 50-minute mark. Okay, so we'll just change this. Things are going to break. That's fine. Okay, we're going to get props as an argument, and we'll take title off of that. Let's comment this out. We don't need that. And it's just going to render props.children. Need children too. Okay, cool. So we've changed this. Now it's not going to update the document title. Nothing. So we can do that now with an effect. So now that this is a function component, we can use useEffect to do this. React.useEffect, going to give it a function. That function is going to update the title. And as before, the time that we care about this is anytime title changes. So we don't care about running this effect anytime, children change, just when the title changes. Change this to our title. Okay, now we got that back. Now, sometimes you may want, that component may have other things that you kind of want in it. So what we can do is, let me rephrase that. Sometimes you have this effect that changes the document title, right? And you want to share that, but you're in a position where you can't use it directly because the component that uses it is going to be is defined in a class. Man, this is a big component. Sorry. It's defined in a class, and you can't use hooks in classes. So how can we pull this implementation out? Oh my gosh. Sorry. This is what I was worried about with a big file, is like I just lose my place sometimes. So it'd be nice if we could pull this out into a component, into a hook that we can use other places instead of having to rewrite it every time. But then also use it in this component so that classes can also take advantage of it. So let's do this. We're going to make a custom component for this hook. So use document title, and we will pass in a title. Now it's barking at us because it's not defined. Now when we make custom hooks, these are just functions. Use document title. I'm going to take the title and call useEffect. Now, elsewhere in our application where we have function components that we want to use this same functionality, say we had some additional implementation details in here. So like my app, whatever, however that goes, however you need your title to be for your SEO. Now we can kind of have that fully encapsulated. We can use it as a component as we've defined here, and we can use the effect. So all of that implementation is in one place. So we're using this here in a function component, but we're also kind of wrapping it in a component that can be used the way that we're using it in at the bottom here as a component. So pretty cool. That's the first thing. Next, I want to show you how we can change context to use context types or use context. Let's just go from top to bottom here, changing each one of these. Now this is a special case. This one is using the class style. So how do we change that? Pretty easy. Say let items. Actually, so we're getting items as an object here on context. So we're going to do that same thing. Items, to structure that out, equal react.useContext, and pass in the context that we've created. Okay. Now we need to update this. So we're not grabbing that off of this .context. We're just using it directly. And we're going to delete this render. Change this to a function. And we don't need to take any props. Cool. So now that title is working again. And we're using the use context hook instead of a class with context types. Perfect. Beautiful. Let's move down the line. We have a context consumer that's using a render prop. This is totally fine. But these can get kind of a little bit hairy if, in the case where you're using multiple render props, because this just kind of, multiplies, and that's really unpleasant to see. So let's delete all that. Our render method gets nice and tidy, and we're missing items because that was defined on context. So going to destructure our context object and react.useContext context. Now, context is just the name of this context in this file. It's totally possible it's going to be like, items or to-dos context or cart context or whatever. It's my fault for giving it a crappy name, but we are just using this context that we created. Okay, cool. So that is the items count. That's this component right here. So as we move along, that is now getting these values using use context, the use context hook. Perfect. Let's see if we have any additional consumers. We do. Our cart items, which are these, are using the context consumer render prop. So let's change that. I'm going to just copy that, paste that here. Use context. I'm just going to grab those out of the ether. Yeah, Liz, we'll see you next time. I hope that that your toddler starts to feel better. Let's see. What did I do wrong here? Oh, they're just not used because I need to delete the context wrapper. Okay, cool. We've deleted that. We've gotten all of that render prop context consumer nonsense out of render. We've been able to assign those up above here using use context. And let's see if all this still works. Yeah, we can update, we can delete. Excellent. Okay, so that's a couple ways that you would refactor from away from context consumer components or context types in classes and move towards use context. Now we're not adding anything here. We're just kind of like moving it around to use some of these new hooks APIs. We got that one. We got that one. All right. Now this is where we change the big component. The big component here at the bottom. This is where we have all of our state. This is where we are using, let's see, where is it? Component did mount to actually like fetch the first state. There's a lot going on in here, and these components can be super hairy to change from a class to a functional component or a function component with hooks. So I don't have a lot of wisdom for how to do this successfully, except to just start. Let's see. Nigel asked real quick, is there a sexier way to deal declaring a provider? Could you expand on that a little bit? I'm not totally sure that I understand, but I would like to. So so just kind of give me a little bit more information on that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this whole thing all the way down to my render here. I'm going to comment that out. It's going to blow up wildly, I know. Comment that out. And then I'm going to change this to a function. We're just going to be bold. We're going to start. Okay. Now that this is kind of properly, function component syntax, it's going to start telling me that it needs stuff. So the first thing it says, this .props is not defined, so we can't get children. Okay, no problem. I'm actually going to delete that anyway, and I'm going to just destructure children from props. Okay, cannot find state of undefined. So where's it yelling at me now? Okay, there are no more thises because it is a function component. So let's change these to just state. So state.items. Okay, no problem. Cool. State is not defined. No problem. Let's fix that. So let state use state. And what did that state look like before? We started with empty items. Okay. There was a remove function. We had our updater function, update an individual item. Okay, cool, no problem. So here we can pass in a default state, and we're going to kind of structure it similarly to what we had before, where we had an object and use items. Cool. All right, all right. Now we have a new error, cannot read property length of undefined. Okay. Let's see, so we have state dot items. Okay, so where is it being angry about this? Reduce total. Items dot length. Okay, now this should be fine. State dot items. Let me remove this component and see. Okay. Oh my gosh. Thank you, David. I do this so often. Thanks, David. Appreciate it. So I needed to structure state. So many times do I do that, where I just take the whole thing and it's array, and it's like, hey, we can't get items off of this array, bro. What the heck's going on? Um, okay. Woo! Okay, cool. So this is working. So we have 0 items. That's fine. And then because we don't have this component did mount function going anymore, well, we're not actually putting new items into our cart state. So this is the next thing that we need to try to emulate. Let's do react.useEffect. And how do we want to do this? Let's just paste in what we had before. Fetch cart items, then, for each item, or sorry, then take the items and shove them on state. Okay, so how is this going to work now? Well, first we need to call our update state function. We need to define that. Okay, and then we're going to we're going to pass in a new object with those items. Killer. It's happening. So now at least we have those items. We can't interact with them because we haven't hooked that up yet, but all this state is working. Let's use our custom useEffect hook now to update that title. Use document title is what we called it. And we're going to pass in what? Items.length. Sorry. State.length. All right. That means that we can delete this one, which is nice because it clears up our render, and now only components that are either providing state or rendering to the DOM are being rendered in this rendered, which is awesome. Now I obviously did not do this right, so let's change that to be dynamic. State.items. Cool. This is going to bother me. Okay. Killer. So this thing is coming along. Now we need to hook up those actions. Now, instead of, let's see, not entirely sure how I want to do this. Do I want to kind of wrap use state or go directly to dispatching? So my intuition, and I think I kind of I kind of share this with a number of people, is that the clearest replacement for set state, which we had in previous component models like the class components, is useReducer. Now it is kind of a mental shift, but anytime that I want to use an object, I almost always want to reach for useReducer anyway. So let's go through this process and kind of convert this to useReducer now, and then add the actions later, just because I know that I'm going to want to use that. Okay, so we have it all working. Everything's rendered here with the exception of the actions. So let's update that. So let's delete this for now. Yep. Change this to useReducer. We're already passing in our initial items, so we're going to need to pass in a reducer. Let's define that. I think typically I'd probably define this outside of my component, so it doesn't get like kind of redefined every time. But I'm just going to do it here for screen height. Reducer signature is to take state and then whichever action you want to perform on it. Inside will be a switch. And it's going to observe the action.type. The actions we will send in are going to be objects with a type property, and that type will be what we case switch on. So for this case, we're going to want to, let's see, let's just say update. Let's create a case for update, which we'll use in the case of fetching and inserting an entirely new state. So in the case of update, we're going to return a new state. We're going to spread out all of the old state on it. And then for items, or let's see, update items. And then for items, we're actually going to take action for sanity. Let's call this items. There are some ideas about how you should pass in data here, but we'll see. Okay, expected syntax. I knew that I probably screwed up my switch syntax because I always do. Cool. Perfect. Cool. So now with this, we're going to dispatch an action object. The type is going to be update items. And we're going to pass along items as part of that action. Okay, so now this action that gets passed along doesn't just have a type, but it also has action items. Now, in order for this to work, we need to have our dispatch function. So let's destructure that off as well. And now it works. So this fetch is running. It's calling dispatch with the action update items and some new items, which we create a new state object from the old one and replace the items on it with the items that we got from our fetch. Cool. Coming along. Now, something that we'll need to do next is to do a delete. The delete is a little bit easier than the update, so let's start with that. Now we notice that there, in this return, there's actually several cases for different types of things. Let's say someone wanted to use the render prop function as children pattern, they could do that. If they wanted to we pass a state provider with the state and the children otherwise, and then this is kind of the default construction what you're seeing here. Now I'm going to delete this, but I wanted you to see this is what a lot of my render functions look like, which allow us to provide different APIs. So if you want to do a render prop, here's all the state. This is how you do it. If you want to use all of these components on context, the way that we're doing that here, here's the state, and here's on the context provider. If you just want to use cart by itself and don't want to think about it, here is kind of like a default construction of what all of those components would look like. Now for sanity here, I'm going to delete this and just kind of so we can focus just on this one problem. But traditionally, you need to, if you had a render that looked like that, you need to solve for all those cases. So now one area that we have a little bit of a problem now is, from having state before, is that the previous state, the way we were kind of doing it with context, is that these actions lived in the state. And that's a way kind of a way that we've used previously in context to provide state with actions. But now that we have a proper reducer, it's better to use that pattern where you have it split out of, where you actually just kind of provide that reducer that has the state and the dispatch. We're going to do something that is not ideal because every time this component renders, we're going to be constructing a new object. But I want to do this because for right now we have so many components that are expecting state to be provided in a certain way that we need to kind of make it easier for ourselves. So I'm going to pass in a new object and try to recreate the same interface that I had before with the items, update, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to create a new object and I'm going to spread state out over it. Cool. That makes all of the components happy. But I also need to provide certain functions. Those functions were, let's see, update item and remove item. So I'm going to create a little interface here. So update item, remove item, and we're going to define those just inline. I can make the error go away by defining those functions. Great. Oop, not quite. Okay. Move item. Whew. Okay, cool. So what I've done is now these components they expect the value to be presented this way. So I'm going to give a new object. I'm going to spread out the state, and then in that object, I'm also going to add the update item and remove item functions. But I'm just going to have them delegate to dispatch. So here, update or remove item, and just so you see, I don't have anything up my sleeve. This doesn't work right now. So remove item, I know that it takes an index, which I will then use to call dispatch. I will construct a new action called remove item. And we will also pass along the index. Okay. Ooh, that didn't work. And the reason is because it is falling through to our error case. No problem. Let's define a new case. Case remove item. Return all of the previous state items, and let's find that because I don't want to write that again because I suck at writing slices, as you've seen. Let's see, items is going to be the state. Take the items. Yep, we're going to change this to our action index. And whoop, still no dice. Remove item. Did I do that right? Action, remove item, index. All right, so what's happening here? Refactorings are always suckier than just writing the code the first time. Interesting. Can't perform state update on an unmounted component. I've not seen that one before, but obviously I'm doing something a little funky. Okay, so what are we doing here? So we're providing this remove item function. We're taking an index, a block, and we're going to call dispatch with this action. That should fall through to this case. So let's do this. Let's just return state. So let's do nothing, but log out the action. Now when I click that, what happens? Unexpected token. If you see what I'm doing wrong, let me know. So we're switching on action type. Okay, switching on action type. Let's take this log out. If I return the state, nothing should happen. So we're spreading out the state, which means items is going to be on this object. Okay. So let's see which item is using this. It's going to be cart items. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. Action, action. Wow. 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 Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to lie. I have this actions verbiage, but like not having action in like as a property. That gets me so often. I wish I could say that this was the first time that that's ever happened to me. No, it happens every time to me. Every time. Okay, cool. So, whew. That was rough. That was rough. Thanks for helping me out there. Okay, cool. Let's see if this works. Doesn't work. Uh-oh, it's not a good sign. Okay, index 0. Okay, cool. State items. So we're spreading out all of this state, which includes the items. But then also for items, we're going to replace that with this. Let's see. Let's make sure that the state is as we expect it. Code sandboxes. Not happy with me right now. Okay, cool. State is an object with items inside of it. Okay, so we're going to return an object. Previous state, items inside of it. we spread out state.items up to the action index. Okay, that should all work. Ah, I know what's going on. This useEffect. Is it this one? Yeah. So every time that I update the state, this useEffect is actually running again and refetching the previous items that we were fetching in the cart. And so in order to stop that, I need to say, hey, I only want you to fire the first time. Only the first time we're getting these cart items. After that, let me control the state. I'll kind of like handle all of the, you know, the AJAX requests to say like how many items are here and tell the user that they can't have more or less of a certain thing, and kind of I'll take it from here. Now, it keeps overriding my state because it keeps running every time. So I need to say, hey, don't ever go except for the first time. So if we do this now again, delete that. We're good. Wow, this has been exciting. I'm glad that you've gotten to watch me struggle. I hope that it's kind of encouraging to see someone struggle. So that's good. So everything is working. Now we can define our use. Let's see. Our other one, let's just copy that. We're going to call update item. And that's going to be... It's going to get some new item properties. So let's see, this will be update item. It's going to take an index and okay, cool. Let's define that action now. So we'll make a new case. Nope. Every time. Me and switches, not friends. We're going to state the items are going to look actually pretty similar to this one, enough so that I will copy that. But slightly different, I want to construct a new item for the place that is being updated. This is going to, we're going to spread out items, state.items of action.index. And we're going to take the action item, which has all of the new properties. State.items of action index is the index. Oh, there we go. Cool. So 3. Okay, cool. Now I just need to implement my hooks so I can't go above or below, but that number is updating, which is great. Copy and paste these out. Change this to updated item. Change these to use the action index, action item. I think that's good. Three, we get an error. No more to sell. Whoa. I think I hit things too quick. All right, we got another hooks problem. Let's see, where else am I using useEffect? You know, it's so funny. I ran into this problem and I didn't make a note for how to get myself out of it. Okay, so we construct a new item from our action. Great. Oh, gotcha. Okay, so if any of these things happen, we still need to return a state or we're going to have a problem. So what we'll do is we don't want to return from these functions directly. We want to return the previous state. Okay. Now it should work. Yep. No more bug. Awesome. Awesome. Let's see. Okay, cool. Nigel, I will check that out in just a second. So Nigel just posted a, let's see, which seems like it's, so you should check out the use methods hook, which seems like a simpler alternative to useReducer. Yeah, so one thing that's really cool about useReducer is that it's like really extensible. So we had talked about it a little bit earlier, but use state, the kind of like simpler way to like manage data, is actually implemented using useReducer, and so they've been able to kind of like just like pack a reducer in there and then give you that nicer kind of like easier API for just managing a simple piece of state. So yeah, so I'll definitely check out use method. Okay, because I suck at switch cases, obviously. So if there's anything that can get me out of that nonsense, I'm open to it because it's been several years now, and I still can't write a switch case. So let's see. Now I had mentioned. Now this is all just kind of like cleaning up after ourselves at this point. But I had mentioned that this is really not great because every time this component renders, we're constructing this entirely new object, and it'd be nice to not do that. So how can we change our component here so that it basically just puts this whole useReducer on context? That would be ideal, but it's going to require a lot of work, and I really don't know any other way around this except to just do it. So we're just going to do it. Let's see. Oops. Pissed off code sandbox. Do it from the bottom. Okay, cool. We're back in business. So we're going to take this. We're going to just put that whole... Oh my goodness, what'd I do? I don't even know what I did. I think I'm just inserting like thousands and thousands of lines on accident right now. Whew. Okay, I think we're kind of back to a normal state. This has been fun, real fun. Okay, so state is not defined on reducer. Okay, so now that we're just passing our entire cart reducer on to this, we need to now change all of our components that are using context to like basically change their API here. We need to also change this. So we're gonna say reducer of 1. This is not a great way to do it, but I don't feel like giving it a name right now. Okay, fine, I'll do it. Let state and dispatch equal reducer. I hate this name. I'm going to do it state reducer. Okay, so this will be dispatch again. And state. Okay, cool, perfect. Alrighty, so state reducer dispatch. Okay, so now all of our components are all of our context are going to need to do the same destructuring then to get these things off of context. So I'm just gonna look for context and start changing those. So right now we're pulling these off of items. Well, now that's going to be like this. So we pull, so we have an array. The first one is going to be our state. We're going to destructure that object and pull items out. Here we're going to do the same. Where's our next one with context? Okay, cool. This is the big one. We're going to pull that out. This is going to change to dispatch. And we are going to update these. We will dispatch in action. The type, not action, the type will be was update item. The index will be I from our map here. And we just pass in the item. Going to dispatch in action. That action will be type. Will be remove item. Index I. And that's all we need. Oh, got to close up that object. Okay, let's see if that worked. That one works. Perfect. Whew. That was a lot of work. Refactoring is not nearly as much fun as creating things from scratch. So that is that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. This has been kind of a long stream for me, so I'm like deep in fatigue right now. But I think that we covered everything that I was hoping to cover. And I hope that it was useful to you to see some of those patterns kind of like refactored out, and kind of some of the pain that you'll feel as you start to change things from kind of one paradigm, the class paradigm and use in set state, to using context and hooks and useReducer. But that's kind of it. We've been able to kind of touch all of the ones that I use all the time. The other ones are primarily for optimization, at least as far as I understand them. So I didn't want to dive too much into those today because you really need to have an actual application, not some kind of pseudo application like this, to really see where your application needs some performance tuning. So that's it. I'm going to stay around for a couple minutes. If you have any questions, again, reactjs.org/hooks is where you're going to get all of the documentation on hooks. And hopefully I've kind of given you enough hooks into that information that it'll be a little bit easier to parse for you. I really thank you so much for hanging out with me on these. It's always great to have your help and feedback. I'm hoping to eventually turn these into to courses for reactpatterns.com. Another piece of news today on React Podcast. We have a great episode with Saran Yetbarek. And it just went live today. She is the force behind Code Newbie, and it's a really fun interview. I'm a huge fan of hers and all of her podcasts. She has amazing podcast presence. So really fun stuff there. I definitely recommend it if you have a chance. Clarification of using reducers as opposed to just using useState. Yeah. So Nigel, with regard to useState versus useReducer, my feeling is that like useState is great when you have like just like really simple types. So like a string or a number. So in the case of the hooks documentation, So you have a count here, and it's just kind of incrementing or decrementing a number. Like that's a really awesome use of like useState, because you're able to just kind of use that value directly when changing this. However, when you have complex state, usually there are a lot of operations that need to happen. So think about, I don't have it here, but like think about if we had a to-do list and we're adding an item. Even in that simple case, we need to change the input state to clear it once that item is added, right? Now, it can be sometimes you can see bugs, if someone were to, kind of write their own function for handling that and not handle certain kind of cases for the interaction. And one nice thing about using the reducer is that you actually provide that as an action, and all of those implementation details for all of the different pieces of state that might be impacted by that change. All of that gets encapsulated into a single, action in useReducer. However, like you were saying, like we were saying with useState, how it is really just like an implementation on top of useReducer, or like you're saying with use method, use methods. That is also, I assume. Here we can actually open that up. So many files on my desktop. I know. So you have use methods. That's funny. I'm assuming it's probably abstracting useReducer. But maybe not. Yeah. So it's pulling in useReducer, and I assuming just wrapping it with the kind of like nicer API. So the cool thing about useReducer is that it's extremely flexible in a lot of ways that useState is like extremely pared down. Cool. So Byron, yes, I did look at use live query, and I didn't have, unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to really like kind of like dive in too much into like fetch here with context. But yeah, I think so. I think that a lot of that stuff, kind of like you said in your message to me, like a lot of the stuff is going to get kind of sorted out as we have suspense. But it really is nice to play with concurrent mode in that way. I thought that the way that you were like handling it really does look quite well paired for that kind of like inevitable future. I am sorry that I didn't get to kind of like cover fetching more specifically today, but I would love to continue to have that conversation with you, just kind of in messages or email or chats or whatever. So again, sorry that I didn't get a chance to cover that today. But yeah, I'd love to talk with you more about it. I am so insanely excited for eventually having a lot of this stuff for data fetching tied up into concurrent mode and React Suspense, because it makes stuff so cool. Everything that we love about hooks is kind of applied to kind of data fetching, and it's amazing. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'd love to chat with you more, Byron, about the use live query. I think that is going to be it for me today. I'm barely hanging on right now. So thanks so much for hanging out. You can always hit me up on Twitter at Chantastic. I'd love to chat with you a little bit more there. And yeah, I'll see you real soon.